Welcome, everybody. We're going to spend about an hour today talking about the New Jersey laws. We're going to focus intently on you obtaining a license. And so if you're interested in becoming a license holder for New Jersey cannabis, this is the webinar for you. So much so, and I'm going to be sharing my screen throughout. There's really just two things we're going to be going over in this webinar. There's the statute, and then there is my slides that kind of summarize the statute. We'll be digging into both. We'll talk about how much these applications will cost for getting started on this, the density of the application, what goes into the application, the different types of licenses, and also there's different types of licenses and there's different styles of those types of licenses. New Jersey's licensing scheme is quite complex relative to other states. And it looks like it's going to be exciting. It looks like it's going to be competitive. It doesn't look like it is. It's going to be competitive. It's in the statute. So you want a license in New Jersey. My name is Thomas Howard. If you want to find me, you can Google Cannabis Lawyer. You probably tried to Google some type of thing and you found my website, which is my law blog, cannabisindustrylawyer.com, or you found me on YouTube. A lot of our subscribers came from YouTube, and that is Cannabis Legalization News. If you haven't subscribed to Cannabis Legalization News, you should, because on Sunday, Tommy Chong joins us, and he has some amazing stories that you are going to want to hear. The most important thing is that this is not just on YouTube, it's also on all other podcast providers. That's where you can find it. If you like any of the stuff here, please subscribe because we are going to know more in the future. Now, the key points that we're going to be covering today: micro businesses, they might not be as small as you think. How thick will this application be for you to get your license? It's going to be like a brick, but don't worry, it's a digital brick now. All the licenses and the documentation and the voluminous numbers of the pages, you probably will not have to hand those in via paper. They will probably be searchable PDF documents. Now, there's also the minority and the woman-owned. It should be minority, woman, and disabled, veteran-owned to be specifically precise. And then, of course, the conditional licenses for a more equitable industry. Now, that's exactly what you think about when you see old Nassau Haw here in Princeton, New Jersey. You think about equality. And so the fascinating stuff about New Jersey really has to do with the amount of locality that is built in, and also the quotas that are built in for not only residents, but disabled veterans, minorities, and women. And then also conditional licenses for more Main Street business owners to get into the industry and also jump lines. But the competitiveness is really, really interesting. So there's a lot that we don't know. And that lot that we don't know will be changing, but probably not until August 21st. We know a lot from reading the statute, but we don't know a lot about the regulations forthcoming. So we will be examining the statute, but we're going to have to wait for the rules, the public comment, and finally the application, which is formally called the adoption of the rules in New Jersey. Now, this will probably still raise questions. For example, Illinois did 2 rounds of questions and answers while taking applications. Not only that, they amended the law during the process. So the changes to the statute may happen while you're trying to get the license. Now, let's go over the cannabis licenses generally in New Jersey. There are going to be 6 classes and 4 types. The first type is the conditional license. 35% of these licenses are going to have to go to the conditional license type. That is going to be covered in more detail coming up, but that is the accessible model. And so 35% of the licenses will be going to Main Street people that make $200,000 or less individually and $400,000 or less if they're filing jointly, plus other restrictions that we shall be covering. Then there is the micro business license, which has a definitional, one of the more important definitionals that we'll be covering. Now, that's going to be a floor. It's going to be a range. It's going to be at least 10% of every class, up to 25% of the total. So it has to be 10% of each class, but 25% of the total, which is fascinating. So like some of the businesses are more likely to become micro businesses than others. I would say that's probably what's going to be shaping up. And then there's other guidance in the statute that looks like will become future rules in August regarding the certified minority or women's or and disabled veterans businesses. 15% each. That's 15% minority and 15% women and disabled veterans business. And those will also allow for greater equity in the New Jersey flavor of legalization. Finally, you have just your regular licenses, and I have in quotes MSO, that is code in cannabis lingo for multi-state operator. For example, there are numerous multi-state operators currently operating in New Jersey as ATCs, at Alternative Treatment Center, yes, ATCs. Vertically integrated large cannabis companies that came in, for example, I'm going to single out Green Thumb Industries because I've reviewed their application. They promised $40 million. Now, ATCs in medical, they had to be vertically integrated. They had to take all 6 classes that you can see to the right and then do them themselves. Now we're allowed, and there's going to be regulations regarding vertical stacking of the licenses to be able to pick and then choose which individual vertical of the cannabis industry you would like to do. For example, Class 1 licenses will be allowed to do cultivation. And then Class 2 licenses will then do manufacturing. So that's like your vape pens, your edibles, your processing of the cannabis plant itself. Class 3 will be wholesaler. This is going to be an interesting class, and it has some severe tax ramifications, which we'll talk about later. Class 4 is the distributor. And the distributor, now, is that supposed to be 100% micro? We're going to go over the definition of what a micro business license is and show you an interesting, I believe it's an Oxford comma. I don't believe that they're actually going to be 100% micro, but I think most of the micros are going to be in your distributor, your delivery, and then also your retailer. And so Class 5, retail, you see that it's a dispensary. Unless you're in Michigan, for some reason, they called them provisioning centers. Just how it is in this industry. Class 6, delivery, and it really should be called like Uber Eats or Grubhub style delivery, because like Uber Eats or Grubhub, what happens is you, as the driver for Uber Eats, don't own the McDonald's. You just pick up the McDonald's and you take it to whomever ordered it. And that's how it's kind of setting up as the delivery driver there. And that's why I think most of them will be micro, because it'll probably just be a lot of independent sole proprietors, I guess, and not necessarily independent contractors that are chauffeuring cannabis from the retail location to a house. All right. The next stuff that we're going to be getting into are going to be these key definitionals. And this is when we're going to start now doing some switching between the slides and also the statute in and of itself, so we can review the terms, because the statute itself will tell you what is going to go into the application, and there's pages of it. So like, it just doesn't make for good slides. So here we are, significantly involved person. Now, that is defined on page 11. So this is the final one that was passed, 240 pages. And so we're going to go to page 11. Significantly involved person means a person or entity who holds at least 5% investment interest in a proposed licensed cannabis grower, cannabis processor, cannabis wholesaler, distributor, retailer, or cannabis delivery service, or who is a decision-making member of a group that holds at least a 20% investment interest, and then also in the same list of those licenses, we can save time there, in which no member of that group holds more than 5% interest in the total group investment interest, and the persons or entity makes controlling decisions regarding the proposed licensed cannabis grower, cannabis, and then of course the list. And so a significantly involved person was several things. First off, it was the people or entity, 5% or 20% of the group. That's going to get interesting because it's already confusing. Like it says significantly involved person or entity. What's the difference between an entity and a group? Is this just going to be a straight up holding company that's going to have investors? Is that going to be what that group is right there? But then it's a decision-making member of this group that has at least a 20% investment interest. Is an investment interest going to be defined under the rules that we're going to be having? These are the types of questions and posers that you really kind of see when you're thinking about how to approach the application. And then the regulators have the same type of problem as they are going to be crafting our rules. All right, let's do immature cannabis plants. We're going to have to talk about this one because that gets into the difference between a micro process. You see, here's one that says 1,000 cannabis plants, but cannabis plants isn't really defined. They have the immature cannabis plants, and the immature would be in the I's, L, impact zone. Immature, and the impact zone is going to be interesting. We'll cover that in a bit. The immature cannabis plant means a cannabis plant that is not flowering. Well, that's nice, but it doesn't just say cannabis plant. You see, because the other definition is a micro business where it says 10 plants. And they will also define this usable cannabis, but the 10 plant limit, that's for the cultivators. The cultivators for a micro business are limited at 1,000 plants, but they don't really define plants in the statute. They define a mature plant, and that's a plant that's flowering. They define an immature plant, and that's one that ain't flowering. And then they say, you're allowed 1,000 plants. Well, how is that going to get, how are we going to turn down on that? Is that, so now we're going to have to build this micro license saying, okay, these 500 are in flower and these 500 over there are, in prop veg or, you're not gonna be able to run a nursery. Well, actually there's a nursery exception that was built into the statute. That's pretty interesting. The next one that we want to really drill into is under the micro business itself. And that has to do with the usable cannabis. And so the usable cannabis is defined on page 12. There it is. Usable cannabis means the dried leaves and flowerings of the female plant Cannabis sativa L and does not include seedlings, stems, stalks, or roots of the plant. And so when they had the micro license defined, they used that definition a lot. You see, that's going to be interesting, and we're going to have to see how the rules come down on this, because 1,000 pounds of cannabis getting extracted, this is where pounds go to grams. And so like the amount of your ceiling for your manufacturer business plan would be calculating to be a certain amount. For the retailers, it's easier to calculate. It's just more widely known, but it's the same thing. No more than 1,000 pounds of usable cannabis. Cannabis at a retail level, I was just checking prices in Illinois yesterday, and that's at adult use levels that you'll probably see in New Jersey. So it'll be like $65 an eighth. That's like almost $8,000 a pound. And then 1,000 pounds of that, I just don't think that you're going to be using that much weight. And so now you're like, well, how much is this going to cost? It's probably going to be a lot of money, and it's going to be hundreds of pages. Now, under Section 18 in the statute, that's going to be your regulations. Those are going to apply to every single license. Section 19, the application section, you're going to see how they define this, and they make them also apply to every single license. And then there's going over Section 19 to see how long this application will be. The too long did not read it version of this is going to be a very large application, and it's going to be competitive, and so it's going to be expensive. And then, of course, sections 20 through 25 are the various classes of the license, which we will cover after the generalities and the conditional license, the impact zones, the micro licenses. Each license requires an application for it to be awarded. Now, the 35% of them are going to be conditional licenses. The ones that aren't conditional or micro licenses are going to require union participation. Labor peace agreements are going to be required. And not only that, there's going to be points scored. New Jersey, in its infinite wisdom as to what it means to be excellent at cannabis, is going to score this application. Now, as they say, competition really drives up the costs for getting into the market, and it also increases the risk of undue influence to determine the awards of the licenses. It also makes it a way more profitable business because you're controlling the supply. So if you win one of these licenses, it's immediately worth millions of dollars. It's the double-edged sword of the limited cannabis market. I don't think that's the right way to do it. I think if the New Jersey is going to continue to adopt appropriate regulations, you're going to see it go more along the lines of the West Coast. California is a good example. And then also Michigan in the Midwest, where you have a two-step process. There really aren't any license limits unless they're set by the municipality. And so you register with the state and comply with state regulations. And then you have a host type community that allows you in somewhere. The application really starts getting going on page 81 of the statute, where it gets into the aspects of the application. And you can really then start seeing what's going to go into your application and why this is going to give you a headache, and then why you should get started now, and what is going to be going in there. What the regulations will do is this statute is a skeletal. And so what the regulations will do will be putting meat on the bone so that we understand how much. Usually you don't see the page numbers until you get the application. And this statute that they have is laundry list enough that I hope there's page numbers so that this application doesn't spiral into the thousands of pages, which can cause all sorts of problems for scores. And you're basically building a record for evidence in case you have to sue. Not that anybody wants to do that, right? Of course not. Okay, and so like, why do we think it's going to be a competitive application? We think it's going to be a competitive application because of this particular aspect of Section 18 of the law regarding the licenses. Each license shall be scored and reviewed based upon a point scale. Now, this is where it gets interesting. There's going to be separate point systems for conditional and micro business licenses. And then there's also a fast track process that appears for this conditional license. Now, I believe a conditional license can be of either type, micro business or standard flavor. So that could be a very interesting strategy approach that we can see how it's going to come out once we have the rules and then the actual application. Applying as a conditional for a micro, if you can do it, might be the way to jump the line and get the license as fast as possible. Perhaps. We're going to have to see how this is all going to shake out in the wash. So this initial evaluation is going to be, there's going to be criteria. And then they're going to say, like, here's where the regulations are really going to start coming in, right about page 81. If you want to read the statute yourself, if you guys do want the statute, just hit us up afterwards. I have it as a PDF. It's public record. Now let's kind of go back to this laundry list of details that you're going to need to be able to put into your application in an organized fashion that the regulators will get back to us as to in which exhibit it will go. Let's say that you want to grow, and this Section 18 is going to apply to everything, but not all at once. So there are going to be generalities, and then in the instance that you want to grow, you are going to need to have all of these types of plans: quality control and quality assurance, recall, packaging and labeling, inventory control, analytic chemistry and testing, water management practices, odor mitigation, on-site, off-site record keeping, strain variety and plant genetics, plant waste disposal practices, compliance with applicable laws and regulations. And then for processor, you're going to have to do that, except you're going to need to have the knowledge and descriptions of people's knowledge and experience with creation and appropriate use of extractions methods. This gives a huge leg up to people that are out-of-state operators or currently operating somewhere else, because there's just not all that many cannabis processors in the state of New Jersey right now. There just ain't. I mean, like you had a vertically integrated ATC. And then that's the other thing with the cultivation. It's going to be like, all right, so where's your agronomy degree? That's why I went to Princeton, so I could major in agronomy. That helps farmers, but then these farmers maybe not necessarily have any cannabis or a horticulture experience. Again, it preferences outside actors that will be trying to expand their licenses into the state of New Jersey, of course, and you should partner with them to the extent that it will improve your score on an application. And then again, waste disposal, compliance with waste laws, Cannabis Retailer. So if you wanted to do the retail sales of this, you need to have this type of operating plan that's going to include, how you have sales, how you product evaluate your procedures, recall, packaging and labeling, inventory control, again, the odor mitigation practices, and all the compliance with the applicable laws and all that other stuff. Now, it gets worse, because you see, we're not done. Now we have to get to the environmental plan. And then you have your security plans and procedures, which will include, and then you need plans for security personnel, experience, qualified, and say, okay, and then you also have to get their resumes and say, like, why do we have this type of experience? This is probably setting up for like a $13,000 exhibit security plan, whatever it's going to be. Security and system features, including descriptions of alarm systems. And so the regs are going to call for what types of standards you're going to need in these alarm systems. But I mean, heck, you even need cybersecurity procedures. And then how do you screen, perform background and history checks for employees? Diversion prevention management plan, emergency management plan. So these will be probably in your operations plan exhibit. It's going to be long. And so, you know, there's all of that type of stuff that goes into it. And then applicants' experience in highly regulated industries. That's a nice one. How are you going to comply with IRC 280E? And so that's one of those things that you are going to need to know if you are getting into this industry. It is not taxed like anything else in the United States because it is illegal according to the United States. And as a result, it's a Schedule I substance. You are not allowed to traffic in Schedule I or II substances. This is one of the reasons why it might get dropped to Schedule III. If that happens, this industry becomes substantially more profitable, especially at the retail level or at the distribution, you know, the wholesaler license. It's really hard to get around IRC 280E if all you are doing is literally trafficking cannabis, buying it wholesale and selling it retail. That's literally completely trafficking. And then as a result, that type of business model and business license in the industry is novel. And so we'll have to see how many of those Class 3 wholesaler licenses materialize and actually can make money. After IRC 280E, absolutely. Just like a liquor distributor. And that's probably what they're setting up for. It's kind of how the New York Compromise is looking at what's going to be coming out too, as a 3-tier alcohol regulation system. But, you know, as you can see, the application materials are going to be pretty substantial, and not just pretty substantial, but kind of ridiculous. You know, you're going to need to have, you know, knowledge and experience, zoning, local approval, community impact plan. The community impact plan was really interesting. That is one of the other definitionals that you're going to have to see, because it is a way, when we get into conditional applications, to help jump lines as well, it appeared. And so then you also need your workforce development plan, your business and financial plan. That can get pretty hairy. And so it's not necessarily a business plan in the plain vanilla sense. It a little bit is, because you have an executive summary that's included, and then you have financial ability. So you have to kind of talk about, not necessarily as a usual business plan, which is soliciting for money investments, but your financial ability needs to already be secured in that business plan. You're like, we have secured XYZ amount of money, which is sufficient to be able to do our build outs. And then experience and compliance with FinCEN. That's a little nuts. Very few people have that. I do, but only because I was a bank lawyer for many years, advising them on how to lend to cannabis, how to break the laws according to federal guidance, which is essentially what FinCEN is. It's a Department of the Treasury, and it stands for the Financial, I think it's something enforcement, Financial and Criminal Enforcement Network. And FinCEN actually tracks the amount of banks that are lending to cannabis. And one of the things you're going to need to do, of course, is get a bank. You're not going to really get that until after you get the license. And then there's procedures in which to be able to bank compliantly according to those FinCEN guidance. This is also the substrate of the Safe Banking Act. That's, you know, you want that Safe Banking Act to pass, because then you really don't need experience and compliance with FinCEN. Those guidances would become obsolete. Here's the silver linings for the locals. This is one of the most local friendly cannabis laws that I've read. And the significantly involved person, how that was defined. Now that has to be somebody who's been residing in New Jersey for at least 5 years. That's really cool. And then the knowledge and experience, it's only going to be limited to significantly involved persons, officers, and controlling owners, not consultants and independent contractors. So if you are trying to get points on, because again, this is going to be a competitive application, so you need to score points. So now I want to go to the statute and talk about this page which just details a lot of these particular terms because they're in blocks of text. Yeah, this is stuff that judges would read and be like, well, I think it means this. And they would have a 3-judge panel and they might not all agree. So there are going to be 24-month restrictions, and I thought it was on page 86, but it must have been covered somewhere else in the 240 pages of the statutes. And so you're going to have to really kind of pick a lane, retail versus production and wholesaling, and distribution or delivery with a max of 2. So like you're going to be either on the retail side, or you could grow and process, or distribute and deliver. So it's one of those kind of deals, and that's going to last for 24 months. The other thing is you'll get preferential treatment if you can partner with the university for higher learning. So if you could figure out a way to incorporate into your plan education at a local college in New Jersey, it appears that that is something that they are gunning for. So then the thing would be to build out your board on that by reaching out to people that are able to have that type of influence. Then there's the impact zone strategy. These impact zones are going to also give ranking application priority to impact zone strategies. And those are establishments located in impact zones with less than 2 licenses. That means that you're going to have to pull up the map as to where all these ATCs are. And then because of the deal that they have for the pending ATCs from 2019, you're probably going to need to update that map and watch it because there's going to be additional license holders coming online. Now, you also needed to have been a current resident of an impact zone for 3 or more consecutive years, and 25% of licenses awarded will go to that type of an applicant. And they have to also have plans to employ 25% of the workforce for residents of impact zones. Let's get to page 89 to discuss these impact zones and how you can use them on your application to get more preferential treatments. So the commission is going to prioritize applications on the basis of impact zones. The commission is going to have to establish these impact zones. Here's the criteria for it. The most helpful thing would be if if the commission or if somebody else in the state has the obligation to take these impact zones as defined herein and create a map so that they can provide it to hopeful applicants in order for them to not have to determine for themselves whether or not they truly live in an impact zone. This impact zone map, hopefully, gets done by the commission or some official in the state. And then once we have that impact zone, that will allow, because they define what it is, they use census data and all this data that's right here to determine where that is. And they should then provide you a map so that individual applicants aren't grasping at straws, claiming that they live in one of these areas. And then it becomes a matter of like, well, why didn't the state just provide proof of where these lines are? Once we know where that map is, and I would hope that we have this map by the time the application comes out, which is really a kicker because Illinois had a very similar map for their social equity. And that map was not really released until approximately 1 month before they started taking the applications. Can you imagine that? You have to throw together an entire team in a month based, like you're optimistic that you're going to be in the map. And you're going to know if you should be optimistic or not from reading this, population between 60 and 80,000, crime index of this, as listed in this uniform crime report. Like in theory, you can go do the legwork and go start pulling all these things and like checking boxes. But the problem then becomes one of proof. And so it's just very easy to prove if I'm about to say Illinois, if New Jersey puts out an official map as to where these impact zones are. So these rankings with respect to impact zones, they're going to give priority to the following. And then they list who's going to get this priority. So a cannabis establishment located or intended to be located within the impact zone, and that impact zone is less than 2 licenses. That will be a prioritized distribution of licenses. So at least 2 licenses are in each impact zone. This will create a race for finding out which one of these holes is the last one to fill. We need to see the impact zone map that's official, as opposed to the one that we create ourselves and then say like, isn't this right, New Jersey? And then you know that those are going to be licenses that are basically given out first. And then it would go to an applicant who is a current resident of an impact zone and has resided there for 3 or more consecutive years. And then to the extent reasonably practical, at least 25% of the total licenses for these will go to such type of applicants. So now it really becomes, I mean, like talk about hyper local. It is all about the real estate which you live. And then that will allow you to get legs up as to this. I mean, imagine if you are an applicant in an impact zone that does a conditional application and you're also like a disabled veteran. Think about that. I mean, like talk about an triple threat, you know, because those are the types that of applications that the state is really, really looking to prioritize and hit their quotas for, because they set specific quotas for them. I mean, by specific quotas, I mean, like, here's 25%, here's 25% of the total licenses. And then you could also try to get that impact zone special treatment by presenting a plan that's a test that you swear to employ 25% of the employees that live in this impact zone. Failure to meet this requisite percentage within 90 days of open. So like if you say you're going to do it and then you don't do it in 90 days, well, there you go. This is the micro business one. Micro businesses don't seem like they're that small when you really kind of run some numbers on them. With the question mark on me, I'd have to do a financial plan and crunch some numbers on the processor license, because you're taking 1,000 pounds of usable cannabis. And what does that equate to after you squeeze it, you know, after you distill it? Some of the really talented processors and distillers out there can do that math in their head. It's impressive. And I hope that that's the type of talent that you have on your team, because as you saw, that was front and center as to some of the things they're going to be scoring. But the micro businesses are going to be for local people, New Jerseyans, 100% owners by current New Jersey residents that have been there for the past 2 consecutive years. So at least 10% of each class of the 6 classes of licenses and 25% of the total number of licenses need to be micro growers. It's again, New Jersey creating these quotas that benefit smaller business owners, more diverse business owners, but no matter what, New Jersey business owners. That's really your upside here. You have a licensing rubric unlike other states, and they really appear to be trying, to the extent they can, walk this fine line between lowering the barriers of entry while still having it obscenely regulated. And I think after, I mean, you could read those pages and you could say, like, this is kind of obscenely regulated, and then see the rules come out and you'd be like, wow, this is kind of obscenely regulated. But, and there might be 2 different rule structures. If there's going to be 2 different score systems, your micro rule structures hopefully are more accessible. We're going to have to wait and see. But 51% of the micro owners are going to be current New Jersey residents where the micro is located. Again, super hyper local. It's not necessarily where you live, that you live in New Jersey. It's that you live in that city in New Jersey. And you can't have more than 10 employees, 2,500 square feet of grow space, except for the growers. Then it's 2,500 to grow, and it's 1,000 plants, which they didn't do a very good job of defining, or 1,000 pounds for non-grower licenses. And then there's no other ownership of license. So there's a complete lockout of ownership of licenses. If you have a micro license, you aren't getting other stuff. Now, the conditional license is the way that I think most startups are probably going to approach getting their foot in the door to their first license, because the conditional license appears to be quicker. And then also it has a quota. It has the 35% of these total licenses are going to be conditional. And so what that basically means is they're going to grant you this license, and then they're going to give you about 4 months to finish the rest of it. And then they can continue that indefinitely for like another 45 days. So it is trying to bring down the cost of being awarded that license so that it's not super onerous, in the sense that some other states, like Illinois does have a conditional version of this, but you had to be like completely done already. before you could even be given a conditional. And the only condition was, now go find your real estate. That was literally it. And then it also has this kind of speedy type of process that's contemplated. Regulators are directed by the statute that they need to start processing these applications within a certain time frame. And that's great because, you know, over in Illinois, they're still waiting for a license award that was done over a year ago. And so that's going to mean that they're going to start, and they're going to have 30 days to do a quick review of your license, and 14 days to forward that application to a municipality to see if the municipality is on board with it as well. And then you need to verify at least one significantly involved person resided in the state for 2 years, a list of all the financial interested people with decision-making authority. Of course, everybody has to be over 21. Of course, you have to provide your names and addresses, but then they have proof of income limits. So they are trying to open up the industry for people that aren't mega millionaires. That's fantastic. You now have to prove income limits of $200,000 for single filers or $400,000 for joint filers. No other cannabis license. And then you're going to need a business and management operations profile and more. And so, like, you are still going to need, I'm not sure how lengthy, application. But the reason why cannabis applications are very lengthy in highly regulated states is because everything that you put in that cannabis obligation, it should be called a cannabis obligation, it's a license. Everything that you put into your application is a condition. And so it's a promise that you're making to that state that you are going to comply. And that compliance and the demonstration of that compliance, let's say the rules and regulations, I mean, the statute is several hundred pages. And let's say the rules and regulations regarding your particular license, there's several hundred pages. You're going to create from those rules and regulations your application. So if you're starting from a few hundred pages of regulations, it's going to be a few hundred pages. And then you actually have to build your company. So like your farm or your processing lab or your retail outlet or your warehouse, if that ever becomes profitable. So yeah, I mean, as I've been belaboring the point, New Jersey is going to be a fairly complex licensing structure. And so that is just how it is. Some states, they prioritize other things. It appears that New Jersey is going to be prioritizing, like, making sure that you're able to access your license for a reasonable price, as opposed to just how ridiculously expensive it can get. And now, you know, you should still probably have investors, and then you should also have the right team. It's definitely trying to make sure that it's not so small that it's just, you know, people. I mean, it still could be like a family-owned business, but it's going to be expensive to try to do business as a family-owned business in this industry because of the ongoing costs of compliance and the regulatory hurdles that you're going to face. And then also the competition. As the regulations change and become more relaxed, very often the stakeholders, the license owners, they don't want more license holders, you know, because that eats into their profits. It's like, well, why would I have somebody else open up and get a license? You know, if it was a different industry, they could just do it, right? But then because it's a regulated industry, they can't. And so politics kind of comes into play. And that's another reason why it's important to get your corporate affairs in order and have some types of investors. So investors can do several things. They help you get capital to open your doors and then bleed money. And so very often what will happen is you're going to apply for this license, and it might go a lot slower than you thought. And it might take you a lot longer to get open than you thought. And it might cost you a lot more to get open than you thought. And not only that, you're going to need build outs. You're going to have FF&E. You're going to have real estate holding companies if you're doing it right, because then that might open up opportunities for you to have financing more easily to be able to get a loan against that real estate. And then you want to do your valuations and phases based upon what your company's output is. So you can create a pro forma based on the understanding of what your volume of output would be. For example, if you're cultivating from only those 1,000 plants, it really would be advantageous if we knew what that meant. So that it's like, is that 1,000 plants in flower? Is that 1,000 plants in total? And then the 1,000 pounds for the retail, for the usable, well, that could be really great. You know, 1,000 pounds of product, that's a lot of product to sell for a retail outlet. However, what does that mean for the manufacturer? Is that going to be something that is so limiting of that processor's ability to have economies of scale and have like real cost and price controls for its business, that maybe manufacturing just doesn't become cost effective. That's going to be crunching the numbers, and so that's something that you want to have. And then of course you can also have like preferred shares or offer limited partners something versus general partners something. You have a lot of flexibility in making your deal. Now, that's one of the reasons why, you are going to see a lot of consultants and a lot of lawyers saying, they can set all this stuff up for you, and it's going to be a lot of finesse, and it's going to be hundreds of pages, if not thousands, depending on what type of license you're going for. And somebody's job is to score all of them. So let's talk about your team. This is the team that you want to put together for compliance, and also its strategy. These New Jersey residents, that you can't get into business, it seems like, in New Jersey unless you're a New Jersey resident. So definitely have them on your team, but I kind of say double threat on that. It's like, well, have them. It's not enough to just be from New Jersey. Everybody basically has to be from New Jersey. The entire micro business license is going to be completely local. So unless you're going for a non-micro license, you're not going to have any non-New Jersey ownership on that license. And so if you're going to try, look at the conditional license, look at the quotas, the 15% for minority and the 15% for women or disabled veterans. Look at those micro business licenses after you've crunched the numbers so that you know that it's going to be profitable for you, because just because they say it's a micro business license, I don't think it's going to be substantially cheaper and ridiculous to open. I don't think they're just going to be like, well, you're a micro license, so you don't need a security system. You can comply with a different security regs. It just doesn't make sense, So put that person on your team, reach out for them, have a diverse team like that. To have a business lawyer with corporate regulatory experience and cannabis industry knowledge. Very few lawyers right now in New Jersey have cannabis industry experience, simply because the cannabis industry in New Jersey has been exceedingly small and restricted to only multi-state operators, basically, or ATCs, very large companies. So there's just not that many of them. The bar's not that big yet. The way they've set it up with the limitations, it looks like this could be a vibrant practice in another 5 years, and I hope that it is. Same for the accountants. There's not going to be a lot of accountants in New Jersey yet, or CFO types that have a lot of experience with IRC 280E, simply because there's like 3 businesses in New Jersey that have to deal with it. And I realize there's more than 3 ATCs. There's like 10, and then there's maybe another 24 coming after the release of the pending medical litigation that's been just pending since 2019. But considering there's only that handful of operators in the state, those are the only businesses that have to worry about IRC 280E. It's hard to find accountants. And so that's one of the reasons why larger law firms or accountancy firms, for a long time, they didn't touch this stuff. But then after 2018, after their state really goes rec, then they're more likely to do it. You'll be able to find them and then train them over the next few years. Then you're going to really need an operator, and that's where it becomes more difficult. And an operator is a person that is currently operating a license in another jurisdiction, probably, unless you can partner with ATCs. But you saw that there was restrictions against those aspects. That's going to be difficult, but then a lot of out-of-state operators are smaller businesses. They aren't all Cresco Labs. They aren't all GTI or TrueLeaf. And they'll be interested in forming partnerships with you. And so that's really a great thing. And that's one of the reasons why there's going to be a lot of trade shows and other events on the cannabis front. So go to those, meet people, and reach out to operators in other states and see if they're interested in having some type of affiliation with New Jersey, getting their products into New Jersey, getting their brand into New Jersey. How do they do that? Well, they can reach out with you. Security professional, the security systems that are currently in highly regulated states are very sophisticated. There's all sorts of regulations on them. And they can be expensive. So security systems can be expensive. And then, of course, don't forget your community outreach, your board members. Go get that broad consensus that you're the right license for that particular spot. And that is really how, in any place where you look in the cannabis industry, it all comes down to it's that locality, the very, very local. In Massachusetts, it's the host community agreement. And if you have that, awesome. So put those people, put those seats, fill those seats on your bus to get your cannabis license. And let's move on to the next one, because we really still have only talked in generalities. Let's talk about what license is right for you. Now, there's the retail, of course, dispensing, agronomy degrees. You're going to go for cultivation. If you're a chemist, you're going to do the manufacturing. And if you're in trucking, you're going to be looking for the delivery and distributor license. So the Cannabis Grower license. Now, if you're going to go look through the statute, this is going to be pages 64 through 81 and 93 through 98. And it's sections 18, 19, 20, and 21 of the statute. So it's not everything that is going to be covered in 18 is yours, but the stuff that is through there, I'd say let's scroll through this and discuss pages 81 through 83, but no offense, that has been working about as well as a Led Zeppelin, and I'm not talking about the band, so I'm not going to be doing that. And so I'll just go back to the slides. The cultivator license. We don't know how this is going to look, but we do know there's going to be a cap on it for a while, and that cap is not going to be for the micro growers. So there's going to be a cap of 37 growers for the first 24 months. And that is interesting in the sense that there's already about 10 operators. There's about 24 that may come online after the release of the 2019 litigation. So there's not that much room at the large canopy, and that large canopy would be anything that's not a micro. That micro license is 1,000 plants. That ain't that much. It appears that there might be a nursery license. If you tune in to page 97 on the statute, they talk about outdoor. They talk about licensing to allow for tiered canopy up and down, basically growth. These are good things that I'm hearing. Outdoor, that means inexpensive cost to produce. And then also mixed light capabilities. And then, of course, tiered canopy up and down, we can grow, we can shrink. Nurseries, it also appears that you might be able to have the business model of having a nursery and then selling seeds and clones to other license holders. And then a micro, of course, we already talked about with 1,000 plants. Then there's your cannabis processor and manufacturer license. This is a class 2. You can tune to pages 98 to 102 of the statute. Of course, the same sections 18 and 19 will still apply, but this is particularly section 22. The most important things about this are going to be the regulations regarding the doses and also the restrictions regarding the advertising. So as you can see here, these little mint leaves or these little cannabis, like chocolates, maybe they're, green dyed white chocolate and regular chocolate. Those might not go. You might not be able to get away with that type of shape in New Jersey. There's going to be a lot of prohibitions regarding anything that is going to appeal to children. And I'm not saying, we're going to have to wait and see, can cookies get a dispensary in New Jersey? Or will those cookies be like, I'm sorry, they appeal to children. You're not allowed to call cannabis cookies. We'll see. All right. And so page 69, if you tune to that, you're going to have standardized dosing. That's 10 milligrams of a whole product and not more than 100 milligrams of THC for the total product. That's kind of industry standard. But then, of course, you have to budget for the equipment to be able to dose appropriately. They say there's going to be some type of universal symbol for cannabis. California has one of those. It's just one of those symbols that people can see, and they're like, oh, I know what that is. And then, of course, micro business, that's 1,000 pounds of cannabis processed per month. It's usable cannabis. If you want me to calculate that number, get in touch with me later, because that number of 1,000 pounds is going to come down to something in grams. And then from those grams, you can build out the rest of your budgets for your ability to cash flow that license. Cannabis Wholesaler, I don't really think this is going to work. So that's 102 to 105. You can go check it out, but it is classic trafficking, crippled by IRC 280E right now. Here's why. A wholesaler buys from the producer and they sell to the retailer. And they take their profit and the difference in price between what they bought at a wholesale and sold it to the retailer. That's trafficking. And that is literally making money. And it's just like the retailer. The retailer gets hit by this right now because it's trafficking. So your cannabis dispensary get hit by it. Your cannabis wholesalers are going to get hit by it. Will this business model work? Yes. After cannabis is a Schedule 3 or unscheduled substance. Will it work initially? This is going to be. I would be very capital intensive if I was trying to get into the cannabis wholesale space in New Jersey, simply because of the tax liability you're going to face for the next few years. And then so you might be trying to do that. That might be your business theory is we're going to gain market share. We're going to bleed for 4 years. But then when they drop this to Schedule 3, that's when we can cash in because we'll be the biggest game in town. All sorts of different ways to attack it. I just wanted you to be wary of that particular rule. Cannabis distributor license. This is much more along the lines of FedEx of weed. This business model tends to work better currently. Now, I'm not saying that's going to be what it is later, but currently. And so distributors must keep records, of course, obviously, of these items in bulk. And then that's going to be how their application is different than other applications. There's going to be a lot of records kept, and there's going to probably be a universal system out there. It's BioTrack in some states. It's Metric in other states. There's probably already one that's being used by the ATCs. Now, is that going to be 100% micro business of the distributor? No, but they singled it out. So if you read the definition of micro business, they say cannabis establishment, comma, or distributor or delivery. But it's 10% of each, 25% of the total. I think a lot of the distributors will probably end up being micro businesses at first. And then they may get consolidated and they might only have like 2 or 3 at the end. Retailers, it was interesting. Like if you read this one, that's 109 to 112. And of course, sections 18 and 19 always apply. And so they're going to work with class 6 licenses. And those class 6 licenses are just basically Ubers of weed. And so you can't be near a grocery store. They were very clear on that. They said it at least twice. It was interesting. So there's going to be probably great restrictions against weed restaurants. However, on page 112, you can go check out that they do have consumption lounges. And so dispensaries can get consumption endorsement areas, consumption area with an endorsement to their license. They have a procedure in place to allow for cannabis consumption lounges in New Jersey, which is fantastic. And then finally, it's cannabis delivery licenses. This is basically a courier service, not all that different than Uber Eats. It might be great, for the gig economy. I don't think it's necessarily going to be great for, I don't know any Uber drivers that got rich from Uber driving, and so I think it's going to be that business model. Very often, these types of licenses are not profitable. For example, in Massachusetts. So anyway, I just wanted to stress again, please subscribe to Cannabis Legalization News on YouTube. Sign up for our newsletter at cannabisindustrylawyer.com, and I am going to stop sharing that. Thanks for joining us on this webinar. All right, and then we do have time for some QA. It's at 1 hour. If you got to go, you got to go. There's 4 questions. Can you get 2 or more classes under the same license? Very often it's not wise to have the license. All right. If you are going to have the same license be owned by the same corporate entity, problems can occur. And so very often there's this thing called series LLCs. And so you could, I'm not sure if they have series LLCs in New Jersey. I know they don't have them in Michigan. So you would just have sub LLCs, and then there might be like a C Corp from Delaware that's just kind of parenting over the top of them. And then you would be able to have more security and protection from the corporate structure. And then also you could have various ownership for the conditional applications. Very often, like, you heard how much of this is going to be prioritized towards being New Jersey residents. And because there are a lot of priorities going to go to New Jersey residents, very often if a larger company from outside wants to come in, that C Corp might then hold some of that LLC that is actually the license holder. And then there might be some type of contractual arrangements for like marketing and licensing of genetics and other branding merch between them. So there you go. Justin, we are accepting clients. It's just that we aren't accepting many clients. We only take a couple a month. And the reason why is because we're a small shop and we like to work with the teams that we like to work with, and we want them to win. And so we try to talk to a lot of people and work with a few. Austin asks, can you complete the application without a cannabis business lawyer? Yes, you can. You will just lose. Has there been any movement on home grow? I don't know. I'm sorry about that. And will the residency requirement be something that is conditional, fixed over 4 years? No, these residency requirements, like they're usually dead serious on. And if you're going to prove them, you better darn well prove them exactly how they want you to. The easiest way to prove them is through tax records. And again, if your guys that you're trying to go into business with that you're saying is going to be like your, I mean, it's not a social equity veteran, but let's say it's your impact applicant, minority business owner, you know, trying to get every benefit you possibly can with your application, that person. If that person hasn't filed their taxes, come on. I mean, like, that's what this is about. You know, a lot of this is about generating revenue. And so the way they're going to want you to prove that you've lived there is by giving them form whatever, probably 1040 of New Jersey. I mean, is there a 1040 NJ? I've never had to file taxes in New Jersey. I'm not sure. So, yeah, Cody wants to know about this. If a small mom and pop style business were local with a business partner, would it be best to apply conditional or micro? I think you're allowed to do both. I think you can apply conditionally for a micro license. Now, that's a guess. We need to wait until August 21st-ish, which will be about the time that we anticipate getting the rules. And then that rule will give us guidance as to that answer. And then from there, we'll be able to get into the actual application once we have it dropped. Preferably, before that's happened, we've already drafted our applications based on the rules and the statute and your team. And then we kind of have it ready because the state will then chop it and then say, this is supposed to go into this exhibit. This is the page limit. This is supposed to go into that exhibit. That's the page limit. And there might be like 20 exhibits. Disabled vet with a marijuana felony. Am I disqualified? I do not believe so. Read every single one of those licenses that we went over was only about, it's only about 3 pages. Each license type only has about 3 pages and they are basically the same. And one of them is if you are turned down for a felony, they will tell you why. And then they also tell you what type of felonies that they are looking for. What is it usually? Violence and dishonesty. And so I remember seeing the fraud and dishonesty, embezzlement, that type of one, because what are they looking for? They want to avoid diversion of cannabis. They want the taxes. They don't want any cannabis missing. Pretty simple. These apps, if somebody wants to know how much these apps could be, these apps could run into the 6 figures, depending on what type of license you're going for. Is in case some of the owners are going to apply for the U.S. passport, would getting involved in this negatively impact federal level considerations for citizenship? Yes, this is a deportable offense. And so there's no restrictions against owning cannabis licenses. The problem then arises that you are now committing a federal crime, and therefore that could be grounds for them revoking your visa and deporting you. This was part of the MORE Act that, like, part of the MORE Act actually fixed that. They may have broken that aspect of it off and reintroduced that to the House. But again, this entire webinar is a federal conspiracy. Thank you for being complicit in a federal conspiracy while I broadcast from Illinois, you watch in New Jersey, and we talk about how to go sell weed. These laws are bad. These laws have been bad for a while. So you just have to kind of get used to it and then comply with all the state requirements, because we're going to throw the state under the bus. All right. And of course, there have not been any raids since 2012, 11. I know Lance Glore got busted in 2011, and then there might have been a few more raids during Obama. But then in 2014, the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment really shut it down. And then since 2014, which Rohrabacher-Farr is the defunding of the Department of Justice against state licensed medical cannabis. However, that hasn't been expanded to defund them against state licensed cannabis. There's a difference between medical and adult. And they just haven't taken any action. Merrick Garland said he doesn't want to take any action. I'm hopeful that in the next budget, if we don't get the Safe Banking Act, if we don't get it dropped to at least Schedule 3, they will expand the defunding of the Department of Justice so that at least operators don't have to worry about federales coming in and doing their job, because the federales that we send to Washington, D.C. in Congress won't do theirs and fix this problem. Yes, Nick asks, if I engage an out-of-state cultivator as a consultant, oh, no, he can't be your consultant. That won't work. I mean, it will work. It will work, but make him a board member. Make him your grower. Try to remember how there was that significantly involved person. He can't do it. He's not a New Jersey resident, but they are going to be looking for your ownership and your control and your team to be able to determine your qualifications. And the way they defined it, I hope that New Jersey hasn't painted themselves into a corner too much, because there aren't enough New Jerseyans with legitimate cannabis experience if they're only looking at the significantly involved people, and all of them have to be from New Jersey. If they want that knowledge and experience in the cannabis industry that they said they did in the statute, that's chicken and egg problem. It's like, well, I'm glad that you want this. It's been illegal. How are you going to get it? And so then very often it's, all right, well, hire the out-of-state grower, not necessarily to be your consultant. You might have to, make him a board member. You might have to try to qualify him as somebody who they will look to, the graders will look to his knowledge and experience in evaluating your team. And the way that the statute is, they can't look to the knowledge and experience of your independent contractors or your consultants when evaluating your team. So you have to figure out a way to put them on your team. How much will it cost to apply for a micro business license? I have no freaking clue. And it'll cost as much as it does. But in the statute, it doesn't say that micro businesses don't have to do the application, which include all those things. It does say that there could be a different scoring rubric. And so maybe they just don't hold them to the highest scrutiny level as they would an operator who has economies of scale. But that remains to be seen. Let's check out the rules. Let's see how they're trying to keep the costs low. Because you could in theory apply for a micro business on a lark if you're really rich. There wasn't income restrictions. You would just do it normally as opposed to the conditional. And so the conditional license, I could see them trying to streamline to reduce the costs for. But they're walking this fine line with this compliance issue where they're going to have a thick amount of regulations regarding recall and waste disposal and odor mitigation and security and, name something else that you think that it shouldn't be regulated. And I'm sure they're regulating it. Oh, right. One of them, they wanted IRC 280E mitigation. They want you to have a community impact plan. They want you to have a business plan. They want you to have all these other plans. The business plan that we're writing right now for Detroit is going to end up being like 250 pages, because it's not just a business plan. The stuff that you're writing in these applications is tailored specifically for the particular application based off the statute and the regulations. And so you're not, and then the reason why very often lawyers and consultants write it is because if we're talking about budgets to get into this, there's your risk capital of how much you're going to pay for putting together an excellent application. Then there's your additional risk capital that you're going to pay for suing the state in case it doesn't come out your way. And then there's your additional risk capital that you're going to have to congratulate Governor Murphy for doing such a good job and finding out who his influential political donors are. And then asking his influential political donors, provided they aren't conflicted out from being a board member on your company. It's when they do cannabis like they're doing it in Jersey, it becomes very frustrating in practice for certain applicants. And hopefully the tax revenue will go and do good things, because it may end up being a millionaire's club. It's not supposed to. They're trying not to set it up that way. But when they make it this competitive, and when they make it very tightly regulated, very often that's what happens. So far, I mean, again, this is the The cannabis industry doesn't exist in New Jersey. All right. So don't let it be defined by onerous regulation, by only these ATCs, which are vertically integrated, publicly traded cannabis companies, from coming in, suppressing all competition from anybody new so that they have a monopoly for their first few years in New Jersey. They want a monopoly for the first few years in New Jersey. They're going to want a monopoly for the first few years in New York. They've gotten one in Illinois for over a year now, and I realize the coronavirus is a thing, but a lot of the delays weren't caused by it. How's Jersey doing lately? You know, did the last round end in a big cluster of litigation? Yeah, it did. It did. And so that's one of the reasons why one of the slides that I skipped over, Arizona does this very specifically. And Arizona has two objectives when it comes to its regulation: ease of administration. You know, it'll be easy for us to keep track of this, to keep the costs low. And that was the second one, I believe, was trying to control costs, or no, suppress litigation, ease of administration and suppress litigation. So the the Arizona application was 4 pages. And one of the requirements was have $500,000 in a bank account. And then the other requirement was have every single piece of real estate you need. Once you have that, it truly is only a millionaire's club. And so that's the Arizona license. And then that's why a whole bunch of rich Arizonans applied. And now they go to a lottery, and then they pick numbers out of a hat, and then you win or you lose. So it could have been done that way. Yep. And then I believe that's all of them, except for what do you do when you have clients competing against each other? That is I sign waivers. So like, I want all my clients to win. I have no idea how many of them will, but I want all of them to win. And then after that, you could also make me deals. Sometimes people get deals where they get exclusivity, they get ownership, they get equity. But there's, ask that to a lot of the other consultants. One of the other ways it is, it's like, we're just going to take so many. We aren't going to take too many, so we feel that we're competing. We're going to take enough so we feel like we are helping as many people as we could have. All right. I'm not sure if there are any more. I saw there's stuff in chats. And if I've gotten all the questions, then I'm just going to kind of wrap it up and tell everybody that you're going to get an email tomorrow. I'm going to cut this. It'll be quicker, and then it'll also be more elegant. I'm not going to try to do that back and forth between the statute. The statute's there. If you want a copy of the statute, email me at tom@collateralbase. And then, of course, please do subscribe to Cannabis Legalization News. Oh, yeah, Chris. He actually has experience from an NJ grower. That's one of the nice things about the ATCs. There's very few that you could own, but then they do employ people. And so like if you're an employee of an MTC, like this guy where he's actually grown, that helps. Now, the problem then becomes is, do you have 15 years of that experience? Well, no, the industry isn't that new there. So there are growers that are out there that grow amazing weed. And some of them probably came from New Jersey. They probably moved out west. They might be moving back now. And that's great. So, I mean, get that experience, get those knowledges. We'll help some people. We'll help them put together what we think they need to have the most comprehensive, complete, competitive application they can. And then we think that those applications are going to come out around Christmas. It could be a little earlier because we have the rules by the September 1st, let's say. Then there's comment period of, I believe it was 60 days. So that's November 1st. So then, after November 1st, just be on the lookout for either delay or an application to drop. Applications dropping create an exceeding, like a lot of greed, a lot of fear of missing out, FOMO, and a lot of people asking for people to do their applications for them because they were waiting to see the application. They didn't read the statute. They didn't read the rules. They didn't see what was coming down the pike. And then they read the application. They're like, holy crap, this will take me 3 years to do. And they're kind of right. Because the application will actually take you longer to write than the state very often gives you amount of time. And if they do that, that is just another way to see who's legit and who ain't nothing. And they do that just to kind of cleave people. And then they have scores based on rubrics. For more on those scores on rubrics, please do go subscribe to Cannabis Legalization News, and I'll do a show on that. But thank you so much for, greed and treachery. greed and treachery. That is, welcome to the club. It's out there. And so I do wanted to thank everybody that did sign up. We'll edit this so it's more elegant, and then we'll send it back out. Talk to everybody soon.